Hello everyone, this is Professor Reimer. This video is for my world history class on Tuesday, February 2nd and Wednesday, February 3rd. It is the first DOL in our new unit. It's entitled European Exploration. And in this lesson, we will analyze the causes of European expansion from 1450 to 1750 and its impact on the Aztec and Inca empires by creating a fictitious interview with an indigenous Amerindian. So let's get started as always with our preview. What I want you to do, pause the video and name the two predominant empires in the Americas before the arrival of Europeans. What do they have in common? How are they different? So pause the video now and do this. Okay, hopefully you remembered that we have studied the Aztec and the Incas in an earlier DOL. I believe it was in Unit 3. We looked at this PowerPoint. There was a note-taking guide to go with it. You might want to go back and rewatch that video, or at least dig up those notes, because it will help you in today's assignment. There it was. There was the start of it. So I want you to remember that it was there. All right. Again, Aztec and Incas. All right. Let's see if I can get back to today's PowerPoint. There it is. All right. So there's no note-taking guide for this PowerPoint. So we're moving into the next semester. I want to build on what we've done in the past. So make your own. Right. You got the top. That is the topic of the slide. You should definitely put that down. These are the major bullets. I will add to them. So you will want to, at minimum, write these down, but hopefully you can add a little bit more. So we're talking about causes first of the European exploration. It helps to provide some context, sort of this background to the topic. So remember, Europe had long been isolated from the world. They were considered on the margins. They're kind of the backwater. No one really went there to trade with them because they didn't really have a lot to trade with. They were behind technologically, so it's not like they were traveling around and exploring before the 1400s. They had been long attracted to Asia, but primarily the goods from Asia. Remember, during the Crusades, one of the key effects of the Crusades is that Crusaders were introduced to a lot of the goods from Asia, like the spices, and then they brought them back. And in subsequent years, Europeans began trading in the Mediterranean for those goods. Marco Polo, remember, in the 13th century had gone to China, lived there for many decades, and then come back to Europe and wrote about his travels. And it sort of like blew people's minds about what kind of stuff that they had in Asia. It's not like the Europeans didn't know about Asia. They were attracted to Asia, and especially their goods, but they didn't really have the desire or the ability to get there until the early 1400s. And a few things happened that changes this. Number one are the Ottoman conquests. Remember, in the 15th century, the Ottoman Turks, a nomadic group in what is today Turkey, and began conquering much of or all of what was left of the Byzantine Empire. And so sort of that Christian connection between the West and the East was severed, and to get goods, the Europeans now had to trade with Muslims, which they found distasteful. Also, in the 1400s is this rebirth of knowledge, this renaissance that is going to spur changes in attitudes of people in Europe. And Europeans began to make some key advances in sailing technology, which we will talk about in this lesson. All right, so you can break down the three key reasons for why Europeans began their exploration to the three G's: God, gold, and glory. So here's the God reason. Remember I said the Crusades had, or remember we had studied the Crusades as this period of warfare between Christians and Muslims. It really left a bitter taste in the mouths of a lot of, especially Christians, of hostility and sort of built in Europeans this idea that they had a sacred duty to fight Muslims and convert non-Christians throughout the world. Look what one of the early explorers, Bartholomew Diaz, described as his motives: to serve God and His Majesty. Right? He said right away, to serve God and His Majesty, to give light to those who were in darkness. In other words, share Christianity. And then look at this last one: to grow rich, as all men desire to do. So this desire for gold or for riches or new sources of wealth was certainly a key factor, a key motivator for Europeans to begin these explorations. They really were looking for a profitable way of trading goods, of getting goods to Asia, these goods that they had been introduced during the Crusades. After the Crusades, especially once the Ottoman Turks rose to power, the price began to climb, and that's just because it had to go through a lot of middlemen to go from China across Central Asia or by the sailing routes around India, and then from India through the Byzantine, or they once were the Byzantine lands, now the Ottoman lands, through the Italian merchants, like the city-states we studied during the Renaissance, Venice and Florence, and then from there finally traded to places like Spain and England. And each time the middlemen marked it up, and so by the time Western Europeans are buying these goods, they're quite high. So they're looking, merchants and monarchs, this very last point, they're looking for a ways to bypass the Italian merchants, to cut costs. And remember, in the Renaissance, there's this spirit of individual achievement, this sense of curiosity. And so men, and it was almost all men, were really seeking glory, this recognition of being the first to make never before made voyages of exploration. This is a new time in Europe. All right, so those are the three G's: God, gold, and glory. But remember, I also said there's some new sailing technology that is enabling this exploration. Number one, a new kind of ship you see there. It's called a caravel. Now, a few things about it. So the caravel, it's sturdier than ships before. These ships that have been plying the Mediterranean Sea for centuries, or the dhow. So it could withstand the longer voyages across the ocean. It's also faster, and the reason it's faster in large part is because it combined two kinds of sails. It combined the traditional Mediterranean square sail, but then also you see the Arab triangular or the teen sail. That sail could be rotated to catch sideways or crossways winds, and so you could sail even if you did not have the wind at your back. Another key advantage of this sturdier design is that it could hold cannons, which were devastating to the cities of Africa and Asia. Also, it had a larger cargo hold, which meant it could carry men with guns used to attack, but also more resources for trading. Other new sailing technologies, again, many borrowed from other civilizations. The Astrolabe, developed by the Arabs, used for navigation, right? So it's a ring you can see marked with the degrees, and it was a way you could plot the latitude using the sun. Remember, latitude are those horizontal lines dividing the earth, so you could tell you where you are north and south. Couldn't tell you where you were west and east, but it could tell you where you were north and south. Which direction to go, that was the magnetic compass invented in China, so you knew in which direction to go. All right, so these new technologies helped the Europeans greatly. So let me pause here, check your understanding, answer this question, I'll come back. Pause now. All right, so which of the following best completes the diagram? Those new improved ships, right? That's a cause, along with those new navigational instruments, to these longer journeys, which meant that the Europeans could cross the Atlantic Ocean. All right, so we're pressing along, talking about European exploration, the causes, as well as the impact on the Aztec and Inca empires. Let's keep going with our lesson. So it's Portugal really that leads the way, both for geographic regions, they're the furthest most point into the Atlantic, but also because they had strong government support for this exploration. They're led by Prince Henry the Navigator. You see him there. He was determined to reach the riches in the East, and he also had this desire to set up Christianity. But practically, he set up navigation schools. They helped build better or make better maps. And by the time he died, Portugal has set up trading ports along Western Africa. I'll show you some on the map in a few slides. All right, so in 1488, Diaz, that guy we saw in the quote before, he's finally sails around the southern tip of Africa, around the Cape of Good Hope. The Gama, 9 years later, explores East Africa, and finally in 1498 he reaches Calicut in southwestern India. Story goes is he thought that they would want all of these European goods like woolens and cast iron pots that he had brought with him, and turns out they didn't. The Indians didn't want any of that. They had much better stuff, but he had brought along a little bit of gold and silver, which he used to fill up his ships with spices worth 60 times the cost of the voyage, and he gave Portugal this direct sea route to the riches of Asia, proving that it was possible. So here we go. So they first bump into the Canary Islands here, the Madeira here, surrounding the Cape of Good Hope. There you see moving from city-state to city-state along the East African coast, and then finding, luckily, a guide who was willing to take them across the Arabian Sea. You see there. All right, so Spain, meanwhile, becomes envious of this newfound success and fortune for Portugal, and in steps Christopher Columbus, who convinces the king and queen to finance a bold plan. By the way, he'd been turned down by Portugal and a few other monarchs. He argued that he could find a route to Asia by sailing west, and he was so convinced because he had miscalculated the size of the ocean. It's not like he believed the Earth was round and everyone else didn't. He was kind of bad at math. He thought it would take much shorter time than it did, and he didn't obviously know there were two continents in the way. But it's fortunate that they were there, because he and his crew were running out of food and probably would have died at sea with no one remembering them had they not bumped into the Americas. But they did. So they reach an island. Hispaniola is called, today's Dominican Republic and Haiti. On these ships, by the way, these ships are tiny compared to those Chinese yunk ships of the previous century with Zhang Hu. And the reason these peoples are still called the Indians today, because he actually had thought he'd reached the East Indies, what we now call Indonesia. And even though he went back on subsequent trips and kept exploring, he really thought that he'd found a route to these Indies, but he hadn't. Anyway, this impact was this increased tensions between Spain and Portugal over who had the right to explore these new lands, this new world. And so Portugal thought that he had indeed reached Asia and had claimed lands for Spain that Portuguese sailors might have reached first. Anyway, this huge rivalry between the two countries eventually lead to the Pope stepping in and suggesting this line of demarcation. Lands west would be Spain's, lands east would be Portugal's. They argue for about another year before the Treaty of Tordesillas is signed in 1494. Here is that line. The Pope's line was this dotted line. The provincial line is purple. All lands west, Spain could explore. All lands east, Portugal could explore. So, for which country is the division fairer? Spain or Portugal? And explain why. So this is the end of video number 1. Answer this question. See me back for video number 2, where we wrap up this DOL.